So hello and welcome to another episode of Rebel City Podcast. What will this be now, Matt? 106, 105? 106, I think it is.
I forgot to check before on. We'll say that 106.
Episode number bingo, as we always have. But continuing on for the last sort of month, we've been doing some coverage of the Scottish Parliament elections, which are coming up in May. We've got Bob Doris, who is an SNP candidate for MSP. How's it going, Bob?
Yeah, I'm doing well, thank you. Yeah, all good.
Looking good in your suit, mate. You get your jammies on the bottom?
It's no a suit, I tell you. And if I could turn this camera around, you would see what state this room is as well. So let's not go there. The camera does lie.
Yeah, mate, absolutely. What you don't have, which just a bit of sort of constructive criticism, you need a bookshelf in the background, mate, with all your...
Well, do you know, in the last Parliament, I chaired the Social Security Committee, and the first one we did was in a wee room through there. I was doing it virtually, like the COVID-19, the kind of socially distanced committees, and every one of these kind of like well-read bookcases in the background, and I had a pink bunk bed in the background with trees on. So it just is what it is.
I know the feeling. It's stripped a few folk up, so maybe it's better to avoid sometimes.
Absolutely.
So, like some of the other candidates we spoke with Kim Long and Kieran O'Neill, you're actually like a candidate in my local area. I actually voted for you last time. So you have the distinguished pleasure of being the only politician or political idea or anything of that nature that I've voted for that actually won. So
right, excellent.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Had to happen sooner or later. You know what
Absolutely.
I mean?
I'll keep my fingers crossed then.
Certainly.
Absolutely. I'm the same, man.
The
I think everything that I've voted for as well, apart from the Scottish Parliament elections, I'm the exact same. Everything I've voted for since Blair, unfortunately, has resulted in a defeat. So it's good to speak to, like, when we talk about the Scottish Parliament, it's nice to know that my vote actually, like, you know, counts towards what, or I get a result that I want. I suppose it's they all count, but aye, I'm in the same boat. Everything's ended in a defeat, so it's nice to talk to somebody that you voted for and has made it.
Brilliant, thank you.
So with the campaign kicking off in the last week, obviously we jumped the gun a few weeks early with other candidates, but it seems to have obviously really officially started in the last week or so. Last night we had the sort of first of the leaders debates. How do you feel the First Minister got on? I
think Nicola did fine. You'd expect me to say that. I have to paint a picture for me watching the leaders debate last night. I was building flat pack furniture at the same time as watching the leaders debate. What I'm expecting my second child in a few weeks' time, so there's stuff to be built. So yeah, I thought Nicola did well. It was always really interesting that it wasn't necessarily the First Minister that was bringing up Scottish independence. As we often say, it's not exactly a state secret. The SNP wants Scottish independence. When do we want it? As soon as possible, as soon as practically possible. And Nicola last night was saying, look, let's get through COVID. Let's build back better, as all the parties are saying. But from the most important thing in the debate, of course, is once this so-called magic money tree disappears from the UK government, which is borrowed money, of course, it's the taxpayers that are paying it back. We saw in 2009, 2010, when a UK government turns on austerity, the impact that has on communities. So I thought Nicola was making a really strong point that the best way to come through COVID and build back better is to have the full normal powers of an independent parliament. But the really interesting thing was, it wasn't Nicola pushing that point. Nicola was pushing, let's get through COVID safely. You'd know we believe in independence. It seemed others that were desperate to talk about independence. So I found that really quite interesting.
Mm-hmm. I've got to say, for opposition parties who want to talk about something other than independence, they spend a hell of a lot of time talking about independence. And I think probably last night was another example of that.
Do you think that's because they've got nothing else to talk about?
I think maybe opposition parties are struggling to make a positive case for the UK. In fact, no, let me take that back. I don't think that's what it is. I think there's a lot of common ground in the Scottish Parliament. And I suspect, maybe with the Tories to one side, that most of the things that the SNP and the Scottish Government have done that in their heart of hearts, the other parties probably agree with and think it's probably the right direction of travel, and there's a lot of consensus and agreement. And the issue with elections, of course, is you have to magnify differences come election time to have a unique selling point. So if you don't want to acknowledge that the decisions taken by an incumbent government are probably by and large the right ones and sensible things to do, you have to go where the fault lines, the differences are. And I suppose that brings us back to the Constitution.
Yeah, I think I've got a question on that just before we get into the actual questions that's on the sheet. Do you think that because, you know, Jeremy Corbyn tried to come out with a positive sort of, here's what I'm going to do, right? Free broadband. We know everything that and whether or not you agree with Corbyn's outlook on politics and where he sees the UK going isn't part of my question. But do you think that a more negative style of politics is seen as like a winning formula off of the back of like Trump? And because Boris and his party never really said much other than get Brexit done and all their sort of punchlines, it's almost like politics has been reduced down to look how bad the other side will be, vote for me, rather than here's what I can do to have a positive impact on your life.
I really hope that's not the case. It's increasingly a tactic by some folk involved in politics, but I mean, what's the point of being in politics if you're going to offer to improve people's lives? You know, it's easy to point at someone else and say, look what you should have done. It's much more difficult to say, here's what I would do. I think budget processes in parliaments are pretty good examples of that, where it's very easy. In all parliaments, I should point out, I'm not even just saying the Scottish Parliament, where opposition parties can find it easy to say, look, you haven't done enough, and then when you turn around and say, what would your prospectus be? They struggle to come up with alternatives, and sometimes you're allowed to agree when a party in government does something that's reasonable. But I think the political culture we've got is one where you have to score political points, and I genuinely hope that changes.
Yeah. Absolutely. Me too.
I've got to say so as well. And I think when we're talking about, you know, touching on the First Minister, touching on some of the criticism for the opposition, some of the attacks, as Paul's mentioned, like for this entity that's only about independence, like I think the way both the party, the government, and particularly the First Minister have handled themselves during the COVID crisis is something that, getting into the election, the party can be sort of really proud of, because I think when we look round and we see some of the failures of leadership elsewhere, I've certainly been reassured through this that the First Minister has been, I mean, relentless. I mean, I can actually see moments where the real human impact has hit her. We can also see the times where she's really out there sort of fighting. And it seems odd to me that the political criticism would be, oh, you're all about independence, when, you know, she's actively taken whatever 300 odd press briefings in the last 365 days and mentioned party politics like once or twice when she's been forced to. How do you go up against criticism that doesn't really have any basis in reality?
Well, I don't know the answer to that, to be honest. I think you sometimes just have to stay focused on what you believe in and what you think the right thing to do is. And I do think that Nicola has tried to stay focused on the COVID pandemic. And I think if we go back to the start, geez, it seems like a lifetime ago now, doesn't it?
It does.
Go back to the start of the pandemic, there was a whole debate around when we should have locked down or not locked down. And that debate could have revolved around in Scotland about, well, there's a financial impact to locking down, and you would have to invest, as we now know, billions upon billions to support individuals, families, businesses, and the economy if you lock down. And there's a whole question there about could one part of the UK have lockdown without all of the UK doing it at the one time? Mm-hmm. But the Scottish government and Nicola Sturgeon did not get involved in that debate. I think they did their best to sidestep all those things and try and stay in lockstep with the other nations and regions of the UK and just stay focused and getting the best possible response to COVID. Not a perfect response, a response where there's clearly been mistakes and errors made, and they've been admitted pretty frankly, but try to do the right thing rather than play the politics on it.
Absolutely. I think that's there's a key thing in there that you just said there, Bob, about like the differences. And it's clearly highlighted in the SQA thing that happened. It wasn't great public relations, the whole sort of exam school thing where they tried to just do a general sort of hitting out in the grades. But the First Minister came out and admitted that they had done it wrong and they were going to turn it back and get it right. And that for me is missing across all politics, where politicians are so scared at admitting that they've done something wrong that they could never do that. You know what I mean? Like I can't imagine Boris, David Cameron, Gordon Brown, Tony Blair, so like our last Theresa May, like our last 5 prime ministers of the UK, ever standing up and going, by the way, we made a mistake and I'm going to do everything to go back and undo that. They just hit it with like, no, here's what we did. No, we did right. And it's like this, you can't admit defeat. And it's wildly infuriating that you vote for people and they can't even admit when they've done something wrong. You know what I mean?
I mean, I think the exams fiasco, and it was not good. Let's just be pretty blunt about it. When the reality broke and I became aware of it, the same day I was phoning the secondary school head teachers of the schools in my constituency to specifically ask, well, how's it impacted in your schools and your departments? And it was varying. It was varying, and then within a couple of days, I was on the phone to government saying, look, here's what's happened and what are you going to do to fix it? And hands up, that as a backbench politician of government, I'm not shouting in the media about all of this. I'm just trying to assiduously and professionally go about fixing what had clearly went wrong and had to be fixed. And I think that's ultimately what the Scottish government did. But they're still, I find the whole thing quite ironic, because had we initially just given, and we should have actually, had we just given the teacher estimate grades at the first point of asking, would have pretty much closed much of the attainment gap overnight by doing that. And I'm pretty sure would have been ridiculed for doing that as well.
We kind of spoke about this at the time, where it was a bit like the figures that were being submitted would have been record breaking, and I think these were a bit damned if you do, damned if you don't. I think when you look at how other administrations were going to approach it, it was in very similar terms until obviously the Scottish government faced a bit of a backlash before people then, tried to sugar about their systems and stuff like that. But I think a lot of what you face is, damned if you do, damned if you don't. I think it touches on what we've mentioned already, where things like COVID, and we'll talk about it in terms of the manifesto pledges as well, because as much as independence is there in the current manifesto pledges, like there are some really exciting pledges in there that are about the everyday lives of Scottish people improving, and they're getting a bit lost in the, oh well, hold on, they're asking for independence again, and you're like, well, of course they are, as you say, of course they are, because that's their main purpose.
Can I just say one thing about, I know we're going to move on from education, but the really remarkable people in this whole thing were the students themselves, who got themselves empowered and organised. And part of the Scottish curriculum that's taken a bit of a battering recently is curriculum for excellence, but that's a bit empowered, informed young citizens through the education system. There's a lot of things we need to improve on with Scottish education, but I tell you, empowering young people to take a stand is something we've got pretty well, pretty solid, and we've got right, and we deserve the heat that we got in relation to that.
Yeah, enough. Absolutely, and it's nice to hear you say that. But again, just repeating what I had said sort of earlier on, you don't see that a lot, and I feel like actually during this pandemic, the planet has kind of started to notice our First Minister, and you see her on lists of like top 10 politicians, and if you were to actually like engage with the media in the UK, you'd probably be like quite confused as to why the rest of the world's kind of like, well, look at what Nicola Sturgeon's doing in Scotland, whereas, as Matt was saying before we come on mic, if you look at the BBC coverage of last night, it does not reflect anything.
It's been absolutely rock solid. So you were mentioning the fact that, as you say, backbench MSP, obviously I'm familiar with myself, but for those that are not, would you mind just kind of like giving us a wee breakdown of your history, in terms of have you held other political positions on the way to MSP, etc.?
Yeah, I'll ask my politician talk. I could be here all day talking about that, but let me try and be brief.
Well, Phil fell with that a few times, to be honest with you.
I'm not born and bred in Maryhill. I'm a Vale leaving boy originally. I'm a Vale boy, if you know where that is. Yeah. And I grew up there, went to school in St Pat's in Dumbarton, and that's where my family are from. Went to Glasgow University, did social science, and became a teacher for a few years. Moved to Maryhill thinking I was walking. I always tell this story, thinking I was walking distance to Byers Road for a good trendy West End life, and then looked north and found Maryhill and fell in love with it. And that was 1999, and I've been here ever since, to be honest with you. I suppose Maryhill and the Vale of Leaving's got more in common with each other than the West End of Glasgow has as well, I suppose. So Maryhill and Springburn is a real natural fit for me and my family, and that's where we've down roots. And that's where we've made our lives. But politically, I stood for a council election in Dumbarton many years ago against a lovely man, actually, who's no longer with us, Patrick O'Neill, who was the Labour Provost in Dumbarton District Council at the time. Didn't win that. I stood for council in North Kelvin, the old council ward in Glasgow. Didn't win that. And in 2007, friends suggested that I put my name forward for the old Maryhill seat in the Scottish Parliament, and also to stand on the regional list. I didn't win the Scottish Parliament seat, and I will pay credit to my opposition. You know, there's usually a reason why people win elections. So Labour Party won the election 2007, and credit to them for that. But I was really lucky, privileged to get in on the regional list, and up until 2007 to 2016, I've been a regional list MSP, and in 2016, biggest honour of my life was becoming the first ever constituency MSP for what is now my home, who supports independence and is an SNP MSP, and it would be an absolute privilege to continue that after May the 6th. So that's me, really.
Is the constituency Maryhill and Springburn, am I making the right assumption that that's probably always been Labour up until yourself?
Yeah. And most don't even make an issue of that, because people should get that. That's kind of the whole point of independence, isn't it? People should get the politicians they vote for. And up in 2016, Maryhill and Springburn were voting Labour, not in huge numbers compared to the SNP, but it took us a while to get there. And and I'm, as I say, it's an honour that enough people showed their trust in myself and the SNP and the independence movement. Actually, 57% voted yes in the independence referendum in Maryhill and Springburn. So in the independence movement, to vote SNP in 2016.
I think that's probably what you're describing as quite indicative of the journey that the wider population's been on, because probably in the early 2000s, heading towards 2010, independence and the SNP were, in people's minds and in Parliament and stuff like that. Obviously, in the years building up towards the referendum and subsequent, you've seen that number grow and sort of significantly swell. So I think what you're describing in sort of Springburn and Maryhill is probably almost a bit of a microcosm about what the rest has been going through in the last sort of decade or so. You know what I mean? So it tracks in that sense. Did I read somewhere that you had the potential at one point to be sort of double mandated and stepped away from it? Was it a council seat or something you stepped away from?
Yeah, so I was a candidate in council elections, and the regional list rankings came out, and I was really lucky to finish number 3 on the SNP's regional list rankings, and things were looking good for us. And I had a very good chance of being elected. I mean, hoping to win first past the post anyway, but it looked almost certain, without being complacent, that I would get in the Parliament. I would never do complacency. And I thought, why would I take 2 berths? There's lots of good, energetic people who can represent the local community. So I stepped aside from council, gave other people the opportunity to do that.
Because it's funny, because double mandates are something that are in the sort of political conversation at the moment. We have, I think, probably the biggest SNP example was the tussle between Joanna Cherry and was it Black? I think it's Black. Oh, sorry, I forgot his name now. We'll edit this. What's his surname?
I'm guessing you're talking
Robertson, sorry.
Angus Robertson, right? Yeah.
So Edinburgh, whatever, South, and then we're also getting Douglas Ross, who wants to, triple mandate if we include his, job as a linesman. Why was it important to you to focus on the one thing? Why, was there a specific reason? Was it just about stepping aside and letting other talent come through, or did you just feel that it was the right thing to do?
I suppose I just felt it was the right thing to do, but I think politicians kind of tweak their views on dual mandates to suit the political position at any time. So I'm not even my starting position is go for the one thing at a time and give it your best efforts. But I get there'll be times when it might seem sensible not to force a by-election and to run in a dual mandate, but it's not really my kind of thing, and my encouragement would be that folk shouldn't do that. But all parties at different times have taken different views on dual mandates to suit the political situation at that time. So I'm just going to leave that sitting there. I'm not going to get embroiled in that, but it wasn't right for me, and it was right for me going forward again.
Yeah, I think the telling thing that you said there, Bob, is that, there is somebody there that can represent the people, whether it's council, MP, MSP. It's the job of if you're voted in for a certain constituency, it's your job to represent them. And how can you do that when you're the leader of another and you've got another job to do? It's like, we're told that the MP job's already hard enough, and that they should get these big 11%, 14% pay rises because it's a stressful job and they deserve their expenses. But then I feel like the telling thing that you said is that your job's to represent people. If you're voted to do that, you should give it your all. It's already hard enough to do that without running the lines in a Champions League on Thursday night, and then whatever. I know you don't want to put the boot in, but I absolutely want to put the boot into somebody like Douglas Ross, because I feel like that is an absolute disgrace to think that you can be an MP, an MSP, and a FIFA linesman referee all at the same time.
I agree with all of that, but I have to say, if I was to, if I was to rewind the clock back, I'm 47 now, but 48, just after the election. I don't know, 10 years ago or maybe a wee bit further back, I spent more time getting angry than I did working out how do we help people. And if you're not careful, focusing on the anger can take away from what help can you offer. So yeah, I agree with what you've said there, but I'll let you put the boot in and I'll just charge on doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, that's why I'm not in politics, mate.
It'll be the first time we've had a politician sit back while we put the boot in. That's pretty much what we're here for. So we'll move on then. One of the things we did sort of touch on was the manifesto. Particularly some of the pledges. I've found myself really impressed with them. Obviously, house building is something that's been a bit of a bone of contention in previous governments where promises are made and no followed. Are you confident that, what was it 100,000 affordable houses? It's a big ask. So
it's also something we've got a track record of delivering on. I'll tell you what I mean by that. So in the last Parliament, the policy was 50,000 affordable houses. I think again with at least 70% social rent. I need to double check that one, but we were on track to do that, and then COVID ground the construction industry to a halt. So we got to 36,000. And those other 14,000 will come through the pipeline, and they're not included in the 100,000 additional affordable houses over a 10-year period. Mm-hmm. But I think the key thing to say is that's a minimum of, because you could get into a bidding war. Well, the SNP says 100,000, Labour could say 110. It's about giving multi-year capital budgets to build social and affordable housing right across Scotland, to give certainty to planners, to constructors, to councils, to housing associations to get involved with the regeneration that we need. And if we can get some of that capital funding loosened up from the purse strings at Westminster, we can potentially even go further.
I mean, that's impressive. I think, you know, things like rent, things like the ability to buy houses at a young age and stuff like that now are such stumbling blocks for people that any progress in this would certainly be like a feather in the hat of, like, any government. It was definitely one of the ones that caught my attention straight off the bat. So that, have you, I mean, I don't know if this is the right way to phrase it, but have you got a favourite pledge yourself? Is there one that you're like, this is the one that has my fallback and I'm all about it?
So I suppose, well, I have to say, I don't work at the pay grade.
Other than independence, obviously, sorry.
I don't know what else is going to be in the manifesto. I'll need to wait and see. I've not got the inside line on that. But I chaired the Social Security Committee the last few years, and our committee took through the Scottish Child Payment, and the Scottish Government accelerated delivery of the Scottish Child Payment. And I think putting money into the pockets of families that are struggling the most is always vital, but never more so now. So doubling that to £20 per week, and also making sure we move quickly, so it's not just for under 60s, but to right up to 16-year-olds, which we'd always intended to do, but committing the resources to fast track that as soon as possible. For me, that is, I hate it when politicians talk about their backgrounds and they get the violins out and they say, oh, it was, you know, when I was down pit and it's tough up north and all that kind of nonsense, right? And it's not nonsense, but you see the point I'm making, right? But I know my background, no need to get into it, but I know my background, I know my upbringing, I know what it feels like not to have money in your pocket at all. And the Scottish Child Payment is making a huge difference.
Definitely. Mm-hmm. I mean, the question then becomes, I think, and I was really pleased. We've asked all the other candidates we've spoke to about UBI, because it's something we've done a number of episodes on, and we just are all in on it. Like, we completely believe in the efficacy of it. We'd love to see some form of it. Is that the next step? Because I know it was a big part of, there was questions, and a lot of the parties seem to come out favourably, maybe not directly in favour, but favourable towards notions of UBI. Where are you on that? So
I mentioned to you, up until a few weeks ago, I chaired the Social Security Committee. We just published an inquiry report into recovery from COVID. And one of the key recommendations, I have to say the Conservatives dissented from this recommendation, this will not be a surprise to you, was that at the very least, if heaven forfend we ever get to a situation where there's such an economic crisis or income shock ever again, we should be able to flick a switch and move to UBI, because despite these billions of pounds, many people have still fallen through the gaps in support and provision, and UBI plugs all those gaps, and you get the money back through the tax system anyway for those that don't necessarily need it. So that those inquiry findings was talking about specifically to pandemics or similar economic shocks, but in reality, I think we should move to, I would pilot it first, but I would move to a universal basic income. It could solve so many problems. I think students have been let down during the pandemic. You know, students who need their non-term time jobs to in hotels or in pubs or in restaurants or whatever, those jobs just disappeared. How are those students, quite often from working class backgrounds, supposed to get that additional money? They should have been able to claim universal credit. They're precluded from claiming universal credit. So there's a deficiency. Again, UBI could mop up some of that, and there'll be 1,000 other examples. I think we've got to give it a go. If we can find a way of giving it a go without the cooperation of the UK government, great, but let's not give false hope on this or be naive about it. We need full power over the tax and benefit system to deliver this in an effective way. But if we can run a small-scale pilot, and the Scottish government are taking steps to organise pilots anyway, then the sooner the better. But again, I think we need to, unfortunately, the full power here, or we have to persuade a UK government. But let's see what we can do in the meantime.
Yeah. Why do you think that the Tories are so adamantly against UBI? I mean, me and Matt, again, have spoke about universal basic income since we started this podcast with Jamie Cook on first sort of 5 to 10 episodes, I'm pretty sure. And, you know, like, universal basic income actually comes from the right. it's a policy that's been adopted by the left. As that seems like a good thing, but it started in the sort of right in America. This idea of liberty and freedom, and this would give you the freedom to do what you like, obviously. But why do you feel like this current batch of Tories are just so against it?
I'm tempted to speculate in the reasons for that, but then I would probably just fall into the kind of cliches and stereotypes about Tories, and maybe not even the Tories, but maybe some folk, some of their core vote, who they've clearly sought to, not an individual Conservative, but they've clearly sought to demonise people on benefits. So if we can slightly tangential here, but this bit's really important to me. How come it was okay for people to be on benefits at the levels they were pre-COVID, and that was acceptable for folk to struggle on that cash? But when COVID hit and hundreds of thousands of people or millions of people entered the benefit system for the first time who had never experienced the benefit system, the UK government very quickly said, hang on, wait a minute here, universal credit, it ain't enough. Let's increase it by 20 quid a week and let's have that uplift. If it's good enough for people who, and they deserve every penny of it, quite frankly, who are temporarily passing through the benefit system, and I hope they are just passing through it, then for those furthest away from employment and with the most challenges, it's blooming well good enough for them once COVID's over as well. So that temporary uplift to universal credit has to be made permanent. And I think it's crazy that the Conservatives have not committed to that. I hope they will. They probably won't. But I just think there's a kind of cliche, there isn't there, about the people being work shy and benefit dependent. The bedroom taxes, and the benefits cap is the same thing as well, isn't it? It's you shouldn't have a spare room in your house, so we're not going to cover your rent. It's penalising people in poverty, and there's a narrative there over a long period of time.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that exactly what you're saying. I mean, you actually seen the media and everything change in about sort of 2008, and we started to see more about people on benefits and Benefit Street, and then it shifted over to the refugee crisis and stuff, as me and Matt have sort of like spoke about a lot. But I feel like the current Tories are a party of business. They're not a party of people. They'll quite happily give billions to their pals that own private businesses. And this is the sort of like thing that I get frustrated with when I speak to people, and they're like, maybe like, oh, I'm right wing because of 1, 2, and 3. And you're like, but what you don't realise is that the current right wing that are in government in Britain are not what you're saying. You're talking about this idea of the right, of conservatism. They're not conserving. Basically, they took all the money and they started to just fire it out to businesses instead of giving it to people who needed it the most. Instead of giving it to people to survive, they thought, we'll just prop up the market. And that's where we're at. And that's not what people think when they read about Conservatives and what does this ideology actually look like in a sort of ideological sense, rather than looking at the practicalities of what they're doing. And what they're doing is they're taking money off of poor people and giving it to their mates that own these businesses. And it's a neoliberal sort of centrist thing rather than right and left. Do you know what I mean?
I think it's also probably one of the ways in which we differentiate ourselves from them, because when we talk about the increase in the child payment and we talk about notions of UBI, if we're ever in the position to move those levels, those things are very much in line with the sort of progressive nature that a lot of us in Scotland want to see sort of more in it. And a lot of what the SNP is trying to sell us is that it's a party of progress and progressive ideas. And like, they're like almost polar opposites, where you've got the UBI that is almost about maintaining and supporting human dignity, and austerity, which feels like almost the exact opposite. You know what I mean? Like, so we have got this separation in a number of areas, obviously, that have led us to all, basically largely one independent nation. But I think this is one of the real like big ones, that when we talk about progressive social policy versus regressive austerity, and we know that austerity 2.0 is coming. Like, I think these types of conversations are really what light a fire under people like me to be like, right, when is independence happening? You know what I mean? Like, because I think we're two nations that are on completely different paths, and I don't see how we cohesively come together as a whole anymore for exactly the reasons that Bathies have just mentioned. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I have to say, I mean, I want the underlying point of independence for me is that those who stay in Scotland are best placed to make decisions for Scotland. There's a kind of basic democratic principle there.
Yeah.
Not any better or worse than any other nation, region in the UK or the world, but also I think people elsewhere in the UK are fed a diet of misinformation about Scotland, about being subsidy junkies and everything else. And I think if they see Scotland making a success of independence, and it won't always be easy, but we will, they'll start demanding better from their governments. So I actually think it's to the benefit of the whole of the UK, not just Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
Aye.
Amazingly put. Aye,
show people there's another way, because the path they're on, they need another way. On the notion of like sort of progressive ideas in line with the election pledges and that, I really liked the notion of school children getting digital devices. We live in the 21st century. I work in an industry that is very old school. There's a lot of paper and a lot of pens, and it, honest to God, makes my skin itch. So it does, because we live in a digital age. So I'm actually really like encouraged by the notion that, although maybe circumstances forced our hand a wee bit because of everybody having to work from home and study from home and so on and so forth, but I think that on the other side of the pandemic that we're actually going, no, this is at least partially the way forward, is really encouraging. I mean, what's the thinking? I mean, critics are saying it should have happened already. Users saying it's here now and it's not gone anywhere. What do you want us to think on it? So
it was happening already. Tens of thousands. I think Connecting Scotland gave out 60,000 laptops during the pandemic. I was actually looking for the stats before we did the podcast, but I couldn't see, so I have to go back and check it. Mm-hmm. But schools, I know schools were giving out devices. Glasgow, actually does a lot of things it has to do better, but it's done quite well with digital devices quite often. And it's not just about giving it the devices, it's giving it the data as well, which is vitally important. So it has been happening, and it's not a new thing. My reading of this is there's been an emergency response in relation to laptops and data. We're getting through that. This is identifying there's a basic right now, isn't there, to be digitally connected. And how do we make sure that right is embedded from young people from the earliest age?
And these kids live in a digital world.
So you do it in a structured fashion. And it's not just the device, it's the connectivity as well. So from my view, this is the next phase of the COVID response, the emergency response. We're getting through that. This is the what next bit now. And it's about how do you embed this new way of working for young people right through education and for lifetime. I would love I don't know if this flies or not, other folk have mentioned it as well, so I'm not trying to say it's my idea, but effectively there should be I would love to see a universal service obligation on internet providers to say it is a right to have an internet connectivity, and if you want to be licensed in this country to do all the things you do, you've got to make sure that for free of charge or for nominal charge, that connectivity just happens. I suspect there's some deals been struck behind the scenes in terms of the data and all that, so I'm sure there's good partnership working, but ultimately I think there has to be a universal service for data and connectivity and the internet going forward, because it's essential, let's be honest about it.
Yeah, I mean, I worked at a major ISP up until August 2020, and I remember sitting in a room I was in a room with some quite well respected people within the company. I don't know what I was doing there, but I was there anyway, and it had the head of broadband and the head of connectivity in the room, and a bold Scotsman went up to the guy and went, "What's the next thing that's coming, mate? I know that there's, like, you going to tell me? And he had said basically that what they see as the vision is that they'll have 100% coverage throughout the UK, and you'll have a basic access to the internet for free. But then if you want to go on Facebook, Twitter, like social media pack, that will cost you £5 a month. You want the gaming pack, that will cost you another. And you can add on these sort of premium subscriptions to the actual access to the bandwidth. But there will be a basic internet package, kind of in the way that Japan have got, accessible, free of charge at point of access, but then you can buy other add-ons. And I was actually like really enthusiastic. It was like, that's so good that that they're going to give that to people. And it sort of ties into what you're saying there. So that's good to hear.
So I think they're up for it, because also if you give someone on a low income your package, a good quality package, and they hopefully, they get trained, they get promoted in their job, they get a greater income, they're going to spend that money with your company. You're investing in your future customers.
Yeah, so, and I think that's an important point to make about that. And I think it kind of comes back full circle. We're talking about like austerity and the benefit system is that one of the things that people don't really understand is that you actually get money out of giving people money. They'll spend it. So like if there's people that are and they need money and you give it to them, they don't just hold that money and don't do anything with it. It goes back into the market because they go and they spend money, which I think is like a sort of important point. But like you're saying, if Sky, Virgin Media, BT, whoever it is that is the first company that does this, they're going to get so much loyalty for the people that access that. They're not going to go, oh, I'm going to switch to Sky because I'm sick of BT. They're going to be like, no, I'm going to stay with BT. They gave me a service. I'm going to stay with Virgin. I'm going to no advertising anybody. I'm going to stay with this company because when I needed it, they gave it to me. So I'm going to put my money into them. So
I have to say, I'm not really a flag waver for any of these companies particularly, but yeah, hopefully they'll do the right thing, and more regulation might be required to make that happen.
Yeah, the British government actually built the infrastructure, and they profit off of that infrastructure. You know what I mean? Like they built the fibre optic networks and the BT copper network, so they should give it back to people. Do you know what I mean? It's just profiteering for stuff that we built. And I mean, we, as in like the raw.
It's all yours.
Mm-hmm.
I'm conscious of time getting on a wee bit. We're at the sort of 40-minute mark. I want to just cover one last election question before we just sort of maybe briefly touch on some recent events, all right? And it's just like, in the event, because again, we've asked all the other candidates, in the event you're re-elected, what's the one or two main things that you're looking to achieve on a sort of personal level?
I suppose it's all politics is local. So what I see here, I'm sure go for every constituency MSP across the country, but never more so in Maryhill and Springburn. It's the North's time in Glasgow with the regeneration of Sighthill and lots of new build social housing taking place. Lots more still needs to happen, I should point out. But whether it's at Hamilton Hill or it's Cowlairs or it's Kilmun, Barrisdale and Lindale, new exciting plans for that down in Maryhill, right across the constituency. There's regeneration happening. We have to complete that regeneration. More homes for people, more affordable homes for people. And I would like to make sure that is right across the constituency, but not just the homes, but the amenities as well. So the example I would give would be a couple of years ago, 2.5 years ago, we were sitting down with the Springburn Community Council and saying, well, what's our regeneration strategy here? There probably isn't one. And I said, I know another community that had that same issue, and it was the Garden Gad, it was Royston, and the housing associations, and I was part of that conversation. They said, well, if the council don't have a regeneration strategy, we'll get our own. And they got their own, and they're trying to implement it now. They've got a new community centre, partly funded by the Scottish Government, at the top of Royston Hill, an amazing community hub that they've got there. And I'm proud that we've helped with that. I said the same in Springburn a few years ago. We had our regeneration forum. We've got a regeneration strategy. One of the first things was to get the Talisman pub demolished up at Balgary Hill. That the bulldozers are there. The bulldozers are there as we speak. Right? And the next step is, how do we bring amenities to Springburn Shopping Centre as well? So not just how do we build good quality houses, but how do we build centres for the community hubs. So I want to see the completion of the regeneration of Maryhill and Springburn, Postle Park as well. We've secured some money to do up the shop fronts at Postle Park. The new houses at Hamilton Hill and Cowlers will make a huge difference. But how do we make sure the long-standing local people are connected to their communities and they have the facilities and amenities they need? So regeneration will be really central for me, and jobs as well. How do we make sure people don't just have a nice house and a nice local amenity, but they've got employment, good quality, well-paid employment? I can say lots more about that, but I suspect you want to ask me about other things. But regeneration, not just the buildings, but the community and employment.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think, like, I'll be honest, like, I would rather we spoke about, this is giving our platform to people that we want them to tell us. So, like, rather than getting into stuff that we want to talk about, like, how would the SNP or how would the Scottish Government plan to bring employment back? Because I think that alongside the UBI conversation comes this whole automation monster that's coming over the hill with automated cars, I mean, we know all about it. Me and Matt have spoken about it multiple times, but it looks like those types of service industry, Starbucks, we can already see the machines coming in where people go and get their coffee from a machine rather than a barista. McDonald's are doing the same, Tesco. That type of employment, which seems to be a very big employment, especially the working class, is getting smaller and smaller. I would be interested to hear your thoughts on how we get employment back to a city like Glasgow, and how we sort of buck this trend of things becoming more machine-led.
Well, I suppose two things, and it's not just the 100,000 houses commitment, but construction will be crucial to that as well. Building and making and manufacturing things. So houses, but also we have to make where by 2040 there's a commitment to make sure every house in Scotland is carbon neutral, is decarbonised. That means the vast majority of our housing stock will not be new built housing stock. That needs retrofitted. That needs workers and trades and engineers and others getting in to do that work. So there's going to be massive job opportunities going forward if we have the right level of investment, but also high-end stuff as well. I mean, I have to say, I didn't realise until a few years ago that Maryhill's the centre of some of the satellite manufacturing industry. So down at the science park, we're building satellites that go into space. We got the first investment from the Scottish Investment Bank, came from there as well. So I don't just assume that working class communities are going to be doing trades. They can do high-end, high-skilled jobs as well.
Yes.
Incredibly talented. And quite often I think some people from so-called middle-class communities would be much happier having a trade, and some tradespeople will be much happier having these other jobs. You know, it's doing what's the best fit for you rather than what you're expected to do. But let's invest. I'm a bit of Keynesian at heart. I want to invest in infrastructure and build, create jobs, create wealth, and tax appropriately.
Mm-hmm.
All entirely proven stuff. I just want to add that if anybody for the spaceport is listening, I'm available for work, because I'm just all over the Scottish spaceport, man. We need to get somebody in just so that I can pitch them, I don't know, making teas or some shit. I don't know. We were going to go into some other stuff. What I'm going to do, probably just try and reframe it slightly in relation to the questions we've already provided you, and say that in the last few weeks, obviously, you know, part of the debate ahead of the election has been about list parties. Now, I'm not going to name list parties or members of list parties or anything like that, so I want to make Mary a sort of general point here, all right? It's
sorry, Matt. I'm just laughing at the diplomacy there. I'm like, I'm not going to name anybody. I'll edit a name that runs like a few names that just run across the bottom of the screen in the back.
Aye, up and flat. But no, there are a number of them. You know, they've seen a gap in what may allow them some sort of representation in Parliament. And for me, it's about the efficacy of like both votes. All right, so both votes is it's, you know, in tablets made of stone, that in SNP terms, I'm not going to expect you to go against it in any way, shape or form. But it has almost kind of left a gap that these, let's say, ragtag bunch of parties are now trying to occupy. Do you think there's a way at all that you could have cut that off before it became the issue that it is at the moment?
So I suppose I don't know what you mean by cut that off. The SNP I say the SNP became and still is a mass membership party, and that's an amazing thing. I think other parties would give their eyes teeth to have a grassroots reach the extent to what the SNP has, and when you've got parties that are quite frankly that massive, you get fallouts, you get disagreements, and sometimes people decide the best place for them is no longer in that party and they have another strategy. Shock horror, without the independence movement, the SNP is nothing. But without the SNP, I'm not sure the independence movement will be moving forward either, and at all. And that's why. That's why, of course, it's both votes SNP for myself. You vote for what you want, not for how you might think an electoral system might throw up a result to your advantage. Vote for what you want, and that's always that's been my view. When I joined the party as a teenager down the Vale of Leaving, and people were shutting the doors in your face when you said you were for the SNP and you were lucky to hold your deposit. Stand up for what you believe in. Vote for what you want. If you believe in independence and independence movement and you want that delivered, for me, it's both votes SNP. But folk are allowed to start new parties. I think strategically it's an error, but then I would say that folk are allowed to vote for different parties.
Of course.
Yeah, so I don't have any anger in any of that. I've got disappointment, and I don't think it's necessarily the best or the right way forward. But I would say that. And the vast majority people I speak to, take the same view, but I don't have any ill will or malice towards anybody.
No, of course. I hope that wasn't something you took as an implication.
Yeah.
To be fair, do you know what? I think that's about as reasonable an answer as we'll likely ever get on it. So, thanks for that. Like, vote for what you want is perfectly logical and right in line with it.
What about just before we move on for this, what about like the political opportunism that we're starting to see? Like, people are starting to, well, again, we'll not name names, but people are starting to come up and try and stoke this unionist craving for something, and they're starting to share like tactical voting. This is where you should vote. And I'll probably cut this out. I'm talking about George Galloway, basically. Like, this guy has come up for England as like his knight in shining armour, apparently believes in Irish republicanism and the Palestinian movement and their right to their freedom in the Middle East. But for whatever reason, because we're Scottish, we don't deserve it, or that we can't do it. But does that leave a bitter taste in your mouth when somebody who's clearly dedicated their political life to things that they believe in? Now, this is the point that I'm going to sort of make, not just to like kick fuck out of George Galloway here. You clearly believe in what you're saying, and that's why you're like, both votes SNP, surely. But what about the grifters that are starting to appear in Scottish politics, and they're trying to almost find their place? Like, oh, this is my chance to propel my own political career. Does that leave like a bitter taste in your mouth to see that happening?
I think it's entirely predictable, unfortunately, and the best thing to do to George Galloway is to ignore George Galloway.
Yeah.
People who hunt him down and his supporters on Twitter. He loves the oxygen. He loves the attention.
Aye.
Why would you get into an argument with anybody on Twitter, irrespective of whether you're a unionist or a independent supporter? State your case, be positive, and just put it out. Just put it out there. But something does really bristle with me, and it takes me from George Galloway. It's about internationalists who demonise Scottish independence. Yes. Scotland is a nation, no better or no worse. The word nationalist is not a dirty word, but when unionists use it, they use it as a dirty word. And when they see things like stoking division, what they mean is, how dare you disagree with me? and when they talk about separatists, what they really mean is they're defending British nationalism. And when you put that back to them, they get angry. and they bristle and they're uncomfortable and they don't like saying Scotland's future should be in Scotland's hands, because I'm not sure all of them believe it. And that is a really, really sad thing. But I know lots of people who are not yet convinced for Scottish independence who don't define themselves like that. And what we need to remember is the independence movement should be reaching out to those people who don't define themselves in the caricature that I've kind of developed around some of the politicians involved in this game. And that's why we shouldn't be tribal. We need to reach out. We shouldn't be bitter. We shouldn't be divisive. We should be open and embracing to those that are not yet persuaded to Scottish independence. But nationalism is not a dirty word. And independence is the natural state for any nation, for any country.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what you've just said, Dermot. Like, it is like what is the perfect foil for negative politics is positive politics, and actually like just proving people wrong. I mean,
otherwise, man. I think as well, just as we begin the process of wrapping up, like the last of the questions we had, and it's not to necessarily hark back on some of the like failings that we talked about previously, but the drug death crisis. This is something that, again, in previous episodes like UBI, we have discussed extensively. I'm an addict. Paul's an addict. Like, we've had issues over our lives. So it's something that is important to us both personally. Now, I know the Scottish Government, and again, credit to them for this, actually held their hands up and went, do you know what? We actually did get this wrong, and now we're going to try our best to put it right. I think they've made something like £50 million worth of funding available for the year ahead, about obviously rehab places and stuff like that. All welcome. We were speaking 3 or 4 weeks ago with a representative for Cisco Recovery who work in our prisons, and kind of asked that your clients are probably the people who I would expect to be able to access these funds and make use of them for the recovery. And our reaction wasn't hugely encouraging for Natalie. How are we going to guarantee that this money's getting to the right people, and things like red tape aren't actually going to hinder their ability to make use of what's out there?
Can I just say, I hope we can run on just a little bit later, because this is such an important question. Natalie Logan, you're talking about.
Yeah.
Natalie Logan is an inspiration. She absolutely is. Doing an amazing job in the communities I represent. She's right that there are, let's say, there's cultural issues with alcohol and drug partnerships, which I would say, if you've had a strategic focus for a number of years and that's not particularly been working, let me rephrase that. It's working for some people, but it's clearly not working for too many others. And you're wed to that direction of travel. It's really difficult to kind of, if you like, steer a different course or to open up. I don't want to say too much about Cisco and Natalie because I've been working with them.
Of course.
And I am really hopeful that Glasgow's ADP will realise that, well, there is new funding available, quite frankly. I don't get to decide who gets that new funding, but I am really supportive of Cisco having a significant amount of funding in terms of supporting pathways from prison back into the community for people who are in recovery, and being best placed as credible, valid and authentic voices within communities who can have individuals who are living with addiction or in recovery open up to and talk meaningfully about what a practical and empowered recovery looks like, whether that's heroin-assisted treatment, whether that is reduced methadone, whether that is residential rehab, whether it's supervised overdose prevention facilities or whatever, or a combination of all of them. People like Natalie and the people she's got around her are really well placed to build those substantial relationships with people most at risk, quite frankly, of dying in some of the communities I represent. And I hope some of this new money, it's £250 million over the lifetime of the coming Parliament. So it's not chicken.
So sorry, 50 million a year rather than 50 million. Apologies there.
No, don't apologise at all, because the number becomes irrelevant if it's not well used. And I'm pretty sure that'll be Natalie's point, because it's not the numbers that matter in terms of the finances we put in. It's the number of people whose lives we support and lives we save. And the Scottish Government, it's self-evident we've not covered ourselves in glory at that. In fact, that's just an understatement. We've just not been good enough. There's been an acknowledgement. And more people like Natalie having an input into policy would be very welcome.
I mean, again, well, the absolute fucking perfect answer. I mean, if I wasn't already on for independence, I mean, you'd have absolutely fucking walked out here with my vote today, no bother, man. Like independent.
Excellent.
Loved everything I've heard you, man. The other one, and you did touch on it, obviously, it's been in some Twitter feeds in the last 24 hours or so, is the Safe Consumption Room pledge for Peter Crichton, who's also, I think, standing as a list candidate, one of the less lunatic fringe, really out there. I know it's a single issue that he seems to be campaigning on at the minute, but I mean, is that something that you'll be behind, or that the SNP themselves will be behind?
So someone tweeted me yesterday and someone emailed me today. I've not had a chance to get back to either of them, and I will get back to them. And I was trying to look at Peter's draft bill on my phone. I have to look at it on my laptop, look at it properly, right? So what I can say, like, I support what Peter's doing. Okay, in fact, he should not have to be doing it from a van. It should be a strategic NHS support right across Scotland. And the SNP agrees with that, and the Scottish Government agrees with that. The bind has been whether it is legal or not legal. And Peter, I think, believes he's got a bill that would make it legal. I haven't read it. I genuinely don't know. I just came aware of it the other day.
Yeah, he's been working with the Government Law Centre by the looks of things, but I've not read the full text of the bill myself.
So what I would say is someone else I met with just before the dissolution of Parliament, actually with Natalie Logan, was Angela Constance, the new drugs minister.
Yeah,
and she is tasked officials to look to find out within the powers that exist to think imaginatively about how we can just make this happen as well. That I'm hopeful it doesn't require one individual to bring a bill forward in Parliament that may or may not be legal in terms of the powers of the Parliament. The onus should be in government to look to see how we can do this. And I have no doubt that if we can do it, Angela will make it happen. So Peter's got my goodwill, but shock horror, I'm supporting the SNP at the elections. But I think the pledge I would give to Peter is that should he not be re-elected, so should he not be elected, and clearly I'm supporting the SNP at this election, his ideas and thoughts won't just disappear, because he started something that government is directly looking at. And I'm sure SNPers in the backbench, such as myself, and opposition MSPs will be looking at it as well. So I'm not sure what pledge I am or I'm not signing up to. But if I'm signing up to doing everything we can within the Scottish Parliament for safe consumption rooms, it's clearly a yes.
I'm with you.
Superb.
Aye, really enjoyed that. Bob, we just want to say thanks for coming on today. Like, best of luck with the election. You know, no disrespect to any other candidates, but you've got my vote, so you've got to start at one.
Thanks. Can I also say something? Actually, people may not believe this, but I actually quite often like the other candidates. We just come from different positions. I might not always like their politics. In fact, sometimes their politics can be a bit closer to yours than people are willing to admit. I might be conservatives from that one, I should point out. But so I lodged my nomination papers the other day, and I basically said I hope every candidate has a safe and respectful and happy election campaign, irrespective of the result. But here's a shot: we're all fighting our own corner. So I'm asking folk to vote for me in Maryhill and Springburn, and I'm asking for both votes SNP, and everyone should just go out respectfully, put a positive campaign for whatever their perspectives is for their constituency and for Scotland. And this is a brilliant podcast, so thank you for letting me take part in it.
Oh, thank you, mate.